So today we're going to talk about three main points, and we're going to try and spend a lot of time on each one of these. One is the admissions requirements. That's an important thing, is to really understand, especially in this changing time, what the admissions office is looking for. The second one is college details. How do you look at the college details to make sure that they're speaking to you and not just mass audience, that they're speaking to your student? And then finally, the cost of attendance, which is a big thing for a lot of people, and we want to make sure that we have time to address. For me, the admissions requirements are standard. They're online. You can see them. Everyone can pull them up. But what do they mean, and how do they relate to you and your student? And I think now that we have somebody coming in 9th and 10th grade, what a great time to look at this. It's a fantastic time, especially with some scenarios that we have outlined later. We'll be able to help guide you to see what the trajectory of your student might be when it comes to the admissions requirements.
No, it's funny because being in admissions, people always ask, like, what's your average GPA, like for acceptance? What's your average SAT score? And I always caution students not just to look at an average and rule themselves in or out of that school, thinking like, oh, I'm at the average, I'll totally get in, or I'm higher than the average, I'll totally get in, because there's so many other things that go into consideration for a college. So I always caution families, don't just look at the averages and let that make your decision, because there are a lot of other things that we can look at as well. But this is at least an area to start if you're looking to see, like, where might my student go based on what their interest and what their level of learning is.
Yeah, and to play off that for 1 second, you'd be surprised how many students rule themselves out and they act super indifferent to a school. And it's not until you spend a little bit of time with them and say, why are you ruling that school out, without knowing more. Much of the time, it's because they think they don't meet that average and they're self-selecting without the information that they really need to make that choice.
Yeah, and admissions doesn't make it easy. Some pages you can just go and say, like, class information, and it will give you all of the statistics about the latest incoming class. You can see sort of what the class looked like in terms of their scores, in terms of their class rank, in terms of their SAT and GPA. But other times colleges really make you look for it. So you can look under apply and freshman or first year application. You can also search under things like student profile or class profile, and it will break down some of those numbers for you. So I think a little bit of knowledge about, like, how do you find these things when you're doing your search. Don't just kind of look just under the freshman information. Also look for that class profile and the student profile, typically on the admissions page. The easiest place to find it too is if you get an actual brochure from an institution. They'll oftentimes have some of those academic and other requirements for admission in that list. Grade point average is a perfect example. Students should always get a copy of their transcript. I think they should get a copy of their transcript every semester, but at least when they're juniors or seniors, they should sit down with it and take a look at it to see, first of all, where on the transcript is the GPA, because every transcript, it's somewhere else. And they should look at their GPA for each year to see what their grade trend is, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And they should also look at their cumulative GPA, because that's what the colleges are going to consider.
When it comes to weighted grade point average and unweighted grade point average, here in Virginia, there's a big shift for the high schools to move from a weighted grade point average to unweighted. That's doing all kinds of crazy things, to families, for students. Should I take a harder class if it's not getting weighted more heavily? Should I stay in a safe class in order to be able to perform to the best of my ability? When it comes to the college process, it doesn't matter if the school weights the classes or not. The college will weight those classes. So the core courses that we were talking about, the English, science, history, math, foreign language, the school, like Jen and people at the college level, will sit down with this college calculator and grade point average calculator, I'm sorry, and they'll come up with the actual weighted grade point average, regardless of whether the high school does that or not. That's something that presents itself quite often now with families. And I just want to make sure that we reassure you that if a student takes an academically rigorous load in high school, the college is seeing that, whether that GPA is weighted or unweighted.
Good to
Absolutely.
know.
Yeah, yeah. It levels the playing field, because if all different high schools are sending us weighted, unweighted, what they include, don't include. I mean, there are literally staffs of quite a lot of people just doing GPA calculations. So
Sure. Jeez.
yeah, yeah. So I like to talk about grade trends too, because oftentimes families think like, oh, if I have, a 3.4 GPA, as all of these people, James, Tamara, and Gilberto have, they think like, oh, that's good, but all 3.4s are not the same.
No.
As you look at this, you can see, in the first example with James, there was a little dip, maybe a trough in the center, maybe something happened in his life, maybe he struggled, maybe he tried to go up a level in courses, whatever that is, the transcript tells a story. And so what we ask as admissions counselors is, don't make us guess what that story might be. So for James and probably for Gilberto, they will want to take the time and somewhere in their application tell us the story. Doesn't have to be in their essay, but someplace they want to tell us that, because we are looking not only at GPA, but the types of courses students are taking and their grade trend. So, obviously like A's is great, but an upward trend is also fantastic. It's when they get in the roller coaster that we're sort of looking
Right.
for a lot more explanation.
Sure. Yeah.
And Janelle, I use the additional information section of the application to explain a lot of this. If the student doesn't want to put this in their essay and their counselor is not going to write about it, there's another section that says, is there any additional information that will give us more insight into your application? That's a perfect place to put that more sensitive information. Tim, in your case, obviously losing a parent, major stressor on the family. If the boys don't want to write about that in their essay, don't press them to do that. It can be added in that additional information section.
Good.
Yeah. But as they're launching, as they're trying to figure out what school they want to go to, like kind of understanding that is what they look
Absolutely.
for.
Yeah.
Fabulous. So
So as far as standardized test scores, again, ever-changing world. Most schools right now, because of COVID, we're fortunate in that they're test optional. Use that to your advantage. If a student does extremely well, and it sounds like the boys will test high, but also an international student with the TOEFL or will not do as well on the standardized test scores, then don't include it. It is a school by school decision. A lot of people feel as though they have to decide they're not going to show their scores or they are. It's not like that. Each school, you can make a calculated decision on whether to include the scores or not. And that'll just depend if it's a reach school, a safe school. If it's a safe school and you want more scholarship money, send those scores, because it may make you eligible for more money. If it's a reach school and your scores are coming out lower, then it would be better to opt out of sending those scores.
yeah.
SAT, ACT, they hold equal weight. A college has to accept either one based on whatever is higher in your student's case. Everyone good with this? Because it's a big question that always comes up.
Yeah, so we went to some college sites to look up some numbers to just show you how different schools present it. So this is a small private college, and we found this under the the class profile page, but they really do a good job. But if you're, for a lot of folks, middle 50%, they're like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And so when you look at this, you see, okay, 600 to 690, that means 50% of the incoming class scored within that range. But that also means that 25% were below that and 25% were above that. So you get a good sense of like, well, if I'm below that, I still have a chance, but what else can I share that shows that I'm ready to thrive academically at that institution? In the next slide, when we look at, the other thing about that small private is they also made it clear that they look at unweighted GPA. If you look at the bottom GPA, it's like an unweighted scale. So if you use the GPA calculator, you can see exactly, well, where do I fit on an unweighted scale? At the large public institution, so a state school, it's interesting how they say it. So they have a median, but they also have a middle 25 to 75%, which is the same as saying the middle 50%. But for whatever reason, they decide to say it differently, but it's the exact same thing. And they give you a range. And a lot of colleges are starting to do ranges now to help students understand, like, it's not just this average and you have to hit it. So I just think that that's where you find this information, and what you look at is kind of helpful when you're thinking of where to start.
Okay, so now college details through the student's lens. This is one of my favorite parts about having a conversation. It's what brings families together, and you can begin to evaluate your values, your student, their potential, their interests, all in taking a deeper look beyond just the academics.
Yeah, and so the three things we thought were really important to cover, and again, each of these could be its own webinar, I think, but we wanted to touch on academics, on student life and diversity, and on outcomes. Because I think all of these things go to your student is not just there to learn, but that is the primary thing. They're there to learn, to get a degree so they can go on and do some meaningful and purposeful work after college. But they also need to thrive socially and personally to get the most out of college. And the student life diversity piece speaks to that. And the outcome speaks to how well the college does serving its students.
Mm-hmm. And feel confident in your family's choices or in your students' families. Like, it's okay to have a conservative view or a liberal view. It's okay. And we're going to talk through that a little bit and how that impacts their life in college. But it's all right for you to express that perspective when you're working with a college counselor, because ultimately it's going to make the difference between a student being able to thrive at a school and a student not wanting to return.
Yeah. So some of the things to consider when you're starting the college search is, do you want a public or a private school? Public being typically the state schools. And state schools come in all sizes, but I think most people think like they're the giant schools. But they're very different across the country. And then private schools, again, all different sizes from 40,000 to 1,000. I even worked at one that had 200 students on their campus.
Wow.
And 1,000 commuters. So that was, they're all different schools. And along with that is majors. So I often tell parents, your students have only taken 5 different areas of courses, right? English, science, math, foreign language, and history, but schools will have 200, 300 different majors to choose from, and they've never really had the opportunity to study those areas. So give them some leeway, and as they're picking schools, they'll know what they don't want, even if they don't know what they do want. So if you give them the opportunity to say, these are the things I'm really looking for, and look at colleges that have those majors, even if they switch majors, they should be able to find something where they can excel. Class size and student faculty ratio are really interesting, again, from an admissions point of view. An average class size at, let's say, the University of Washington, which is a large public institution, was 25. However, freshmen studying biology could have a class size of 400 in like a biology lecture course. So beyond just looking at class size, it's always good to ask, well, what's the range? Not just the average class size, but what's the range in class size? And the same is with student faculty ratio. It could have like a 1-to-4 student faculty ratio or 4-to-1 student faculty ratio. That looks great. But the follow-up question then is, well, who teaches the classes? Is it the professors who have their PhD, who have been studying and doing research in that particular area? Or maybe is it a grad student who is sort of still learning and this is their first teaching responsibility, and so they may be new at it? So asking those questions gives you a sense of what the academics are like at that particular institution beyond just the numbers.
And as an advisor, whether it be a college advisor or as a parent, you have the right to ask for your student to sit in on a class. And that's something that made the difference for me with the schools that I was going to. I actually gave up a field hockey scholarship to play at a local school because I sat in on that class and I was comfortable there. I could sit in the back, I could be invisible, no one was going to push me, and I could skate. Whereas the school that I ultimately decided to go to, I sat in on a class there and I didn't even know what the teacher was saying. Like I didn't even know the vocabulary that he was using. And I remember it like it was yesterday. So have your students sit in on a class and say, is that who you want to be when you're ready to graduate? Is that the place you want to be? Do you want to be like them? Like social comparison can go against you on social media so many ways. Am I thin enough, pretty enough, fast enough, strong enough? Social comparison can be a negative, but in this case, social comparison could be a real positive. It can motivate the student, and you can have your students sit in on a class now. Like as soon as school starts up, have your 9th and 10th grader go to a college and sit in on a class. They're allowed to do that. Let them see what lies ahead and let them envision themselves at that school. And it will make a big difference when it comes to a Saturday night. Do I go out with my friends or do I stay in and study a little bit more? They're going to have that internal motivation to stay in and do a little more because they're going to see what's possible at the next level. So use this to your advantage.
Yeah, I always recommend asking. Public schools may have some different rules, but at private schools, I would always ask about opportunities to sit in on classes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Student life and diversity. This is what we were talking about a little bit earlier. It's some schools have a regional pull, some schools have an international pull, some schools somewhere in the middle. If you're looking at a school, you have to look at the demographics, whether it be location of the students, where they're coming from, if they're international. The race and ethnicity is important to know. Well, how does that fit? Is your student going to be in the majority, the minority? It's something that students face. What if a city is particularly slanted or resistant to a culture and your child's coming from that culture? How is that going to impact them? How's that school safety piece going to impact them? Are they going to feel comfortable speaking up in class if they're in the minority when it comes to certain views and perspectives? That goes along with religious perspectives, political perspectives, all of it. So take a real serious look at this. Let a student spend some time saying, I don't know if I feel comfortable being the only white person, the only Black person, the only Christian person, the only Jewish person, the only international person. Let them safely speak with you about this on a really deeply personal level, because this is going to change the retention rate of a student once they go to the school. If they know they're going to be there and maybe other students are not coming from their perspective, but they know that going in, well, then they're going to be prepared and ready to take on that challenge. If they don't feel comfortable with that, or you don't feel comfortable with that as a parent, it's okay to sit down and say, what would it feel like? What will it be like? Convince me you're ready for that. Let me know that you understand the impact of having a different political view or coming from a different ethnicity or perspective. Any questions about that?
No, that was very well explained.
Okay. So here's just examples, and I know that I know that we just talked a little bit here. I spoke a bit about it, but here's a school that is very regional. You can tell most people are from the Northeast. It's our small school model that we talked about a moment ago with the SATs and the ACT scores, and it's only 5 countries are represented there. So if you want more of an international or diverse perspective, you're not going to get that as much in this classroom. It's going to be a little more homogenous because students are coming from the same regional area. Whereas this is the large public school that we were talking about earlier, with the median being the mean grade point average being represented a little bit differently. And they are putting a large emphasis on what? When you see their demographic information, what are you seeing when you see that?
Oh, there's a lot of countries.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Huge.
What else?
High freshman financial aid percentage.
What do you think that, why is that important? Why do you think they're telling you that?
Well, I'm actually surprised that it's only 25% first generation college student, because I would personally associate the first generation college and the financial aid being pretty much equal. But certainly the majority of the kids going to this need financial aid to be able to attend.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that impacts the learning environment. You have students here that have means, that means a large number of students are not receiving financial aid, but you also can't be thrown by that number, because 69% receive financial aid. That could be a loan. That doesn't have to be free money, and it doesn't have to actually be able to make your family be able to afford. But to this large university, that's who they're appealing to. They're trying to make people understand, hey, 69% of our students receive financial aid. And we'll get a little bit more into the numbers later when it comes to money and how schools represent money. But yeah, this is going to be a more diverse population. So if that's something that your student feels comfortable with, then this is a wonderful place for them to be. Same thing here. It's just represented all different areas. So the same small private school, and you see how they're representing the statistics here. 25, 23% of those who identify as Black and African American, they're throwing that number there a little bit because it's 23%, but divided amongst those groups. So the first gen population is 16%. That other school, as you saw before, was talking about the first gen being 25%. As a first gen student, I don't think that's negative, but it definitely impacts, the kinds of students that are at the school and what are they doing? What kind of backgrounds are they from? Same thing here. This is that same large public school that was talking about the diversity piece in a different graphic. And as you can see, there's more balance than it was in the private school. Neither one of these are good, neither one of them are bad, but you do have to start to get deeper into these numbers with your student. Look at the website, who's on the website, what kind of students are on the website, do you identify with those students? And then go to a school, if you have the luxury of being able to do that, sit on a bench and feel what that diversity piece feels like to you. Does it feel good to you? Does it feel like a match? Sitting on the bench at college is one of the most valuable things you can do other than sitting in a classroom.
Yeah, and the other thing that's really important to find out that I think is often overlooked is what are the outcomes of that college or university? Because we all look at how do I get into it, but we don't often look at what are students like when they come out? Are they getting jobs? Are they going to graduate school? How soon are they finding jobs in graduate school? And a lot of that gives you some very good information. Enrollment rate, acceptance rate, you hear all the time, right? Harvard and some of the Ivy League schools accept 3% of their applicants. So you know that no matter how fantastic your student is, their chance of getting in is slim, even if they're the most marvelous student in the world. So thinking about that as you dive into some of the information when you're looking to start that search, I think you'll see some real differences in how schools work with students. And don't just look at the percentage, but kind of look at what's behind that. So for example, this is again a small private college. So they admit about a little more than, I'm bad at math, 50% of their students. That's not a bad thing. The GPA is still high, as we looked at before. It's still a rigorous, college environment, but they accept a higher percentage. What's really interesting in this is that they share the percentage who are enrolled in early decision.
Mhm.
Now, when you're looking, this is a little farther down the road, but it is something to think about. A lot of colleges will accept a high amount of early decision candidates, because when you apply early decision, you're saying to that college, the student is saying to that college, I will go, if you accept me, I am going to you. Like, I guarantee that I'm going to your school. So for the college to accept 38% of their class, and some are as high as maybe 50, 60, 70%, they're guaranteeing, like, we have this class. We have almost our class through early decision. And like, you should probably help your student apply early decision if that's really their number one school, because so many students are accepted through that path.
Mhm.
But at this
And
particular school, it's not as much. So you have a good chance if you apply regular decision.
Mhm.
Again, getting in the weeds a little bit here with the application process, but I do think it's kind of good to note as you're starting the search. So you start to think, when do I need to apply?
Mhm.
Tim, this is where time is on your side. You can have your student really know going into that senior year where they want to go, and they can early decision to one school and look at the difference, look at their chances, of
Mhm.
being accepted. It's going to increase the chances of the student getting accepted if they have those really high consistent grades in high school. So use this to your advantage and get them prepared before they head into their senior year. And then if they feel really compelled to go to one school, then go for it. Have them go for that.
Yeah.
And Janelle, so many people ask this question: do I apply early decision, early action, regular decision? If you're not quite sure about a student, then you can call. I used to do it all the time. I would call the admissions office with the student in the office, put on speakerphone, and say, hi, I'm here with a student, not mention the name, and say they have this grade point average. Here's the trend here. This is the background. How do you recommend that they apply to the school? And the counselor will more often than not give you pretty good guidance as far as that decision goes.
With early decision, it is binding, correct?
Correct.
Yes. So it's one school.
Yeah. So what I have discovered that can be the downside in terms of financial aid, because they may get accepted, but they don't even know what it's truly going to cost to attend.
A school will let you out of that early decision if they can't meet your need. If they're not in a position to be able to meet your family's financial need, then they'll have a conversation with you. You don't want to go blindly into that, but if a student really can't afford to go, then you can give their financial aid office an opportunity to offer them more aid, or you can ask for them not to be bound to that decision out of financial reasons.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, admissions counselors, I would say the large majority are very reasonable. So if you do call with those kinds of questions, they'll give you options, and they'll talk about different ways of maybe even, just waiting until to see what they get the financial aid package before they have to commit, even if they apply early decision.
Okay. Thank you.
So freshman retention rate. So what that means is just how many students return for their sophomore year.
Sure.
Right. So you can see at the large public, it's 97, it's 88% for the small private. Oftentimes those numbers are flipped, and the large public will have a lower retention rate than the small private. So what that often tells you is how well prepared the students were. Could tell you a little bit about the affluence of the college itself and the support services that are available. There's a lot to kind of unpack from that, but it gives you a good sense of how many students return after their first year. And if it's a high number, I think in the 80s, that's a really good sign. Of course, the higher, the better, but when you get to 80 and higher, that's a pretty good percentage.
Yeah. And as a parent, if it's super low and not many students return, if it's getting lower than that 80%, your child's going to the school. Number one, they're at risk of not liking it. Maybe the school's not representing themselves accurately in the numbers, and students are going there and they're not showing up getting the same experience that they anticipated. But if a lot of students are leaving, that really deflates a student's morale. If at the end of freshman year, people are like, I'm never coming back, then that will affect your child. So you do want to know this number and keep it in perspective, not only for your child, but also for their classmates. And how does that affect the student body at large? Janelle, first gen number is super low this year. It's like 11% of students are returning, first gen low income students. So take a look at that specific demographic of the students that you're helping and ask the school what the retention rate for those students are, so that you can have the best information possible when advising your student.
And if they even have that number, that'll tell you something too.
Yeah, they don't like
Sure.
to publicize it.
Yeah. So graduation rate is really tricky because different schools will share different numbers based on what they consider how many years it should take to graduate. So you'll see that both of these numbers match because their student number of percentages of students who graduate in 6 years. Some schools will still put in 4 years. Some will put in 5, but the standard is pretty much in 6 years. So when you see that, you see like, that's a great number, but remember that's in 6 years. So feel free again to dig a little deeper and say, well, what's the 4-year graduation rate? Because I want my student to graduate in 4 years, and that absolutely is possible. What is it going to take? And I think, those are kinds of questions to follow up when you're looking at the colleges. So the graduation rate's great, but a little different. And then here, I love this slide because first you have like somebody presenting a number, right, for who's secured a job upon graduation. And sometimes they'll say secured a job upon graduation in 6 months and 9 months. Sometimes they'll leave it vague and they won't give you a time. So you're like, And then the large public just gives you a number, like we're number 15, by the Wall Street Journal. But what does that mean? Like, what is the percentage? Like, where are they going? And so admissions people love to give you numbers. They will always give you numbers and rankings and all that. But to go to the next level and say, well, can you tell me more about what that means? What number 15, is that a good thing? Is that just of public schools? Is that, top university? What about colleges? Are you number 54 if we're looking at all the colleges in the United States? So, there's a little playing with numbers there. Yeah. And the last thing to look at, if your student might want to go on to graduate school, is to ask about what the graduate school admission rate is. And we didn't put a slide up here because there's so many different numbers, like percentage to go to law school or medical school or dental school, or go into PhD program or master's program. And so kind of looking at what your student might go into and what is that grad school admission rate will give you a better sense. And again, you might not know that just yet, and neither might the student. So, it's okay to say, like, we don't need to know that right now, but it just gives you another layer of information if they're trying to make some decisions about where to go.
All right. How was that helpful? Not helpful? Any questions on this section? How does it pertain to, to your choices? Any insights gained or lagging things that you would like us to talk about?
Informative. Very nice.
Thanks.
That's the hard part, but that's the part that brings families together, really, more than anything else. And you feel confident. One last thing that we didn't mention, and even though it's boys, girls, you stereotype, campus safety is a really big issue. So make sure that you're looking at campus safety. And if a school doesn't meet your expectation, make sure that your student understands why, and then you move forward on a decision. Campus safety is a really big deal, and it's very real. And you have every right to call the security office, make as many phone calls as you need to get the real hardcore facts when it comes to college safety in the dorms, on campus, and in the community. You want all three: in the dorms, on campus, in the community.
And colleges will always have those numbers available. So if the admissions person can't tell you those numbers, they'll know exactly where you can find them.
Yeah, super big thing.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to take a sip of water. Cost of attendance, a lot easier. So when you talk about cost of attendance, we're talking, and I'm sure you two are experts in this, but it's tuition, fees, room and board. So tuition, a lot of students feel as though they can only go to a state school. And this is a major area students rule themselves out. They won't even look at a school with a higher price because they feel as though the tuition is so high, or they are only restricted to a public school. That isn't the case, and we'll dive into it just slightly a little bit deeper, and always can answer questions. But students, my students, the ones that I serve on a regular basis, are very shocked that if they live in Virginia and they go to NC State, and NC State has out-of-state student scholarships, and the bottom line number ends up being the same. Sometimes it does not, sometimes it's drastically different, but don't allow a student to rule themselves in or out just based on that in-state, out-of-state tuition number. Yeah, Jen, you love it.
Yeah,
You
the
can
expected
take it.
family contribution. So whenever you hear anybody talk about financial aid, typically they are always talking about expected family contribution. So I wanted to put the slide to just talk about what it is. So it's the cost of attendance, right, minus the expected family contribution. And I couldn't tell you the formula for that because that's through the FAFSA. And if you go to our resources page, you will see the information for the FAFSA on there, as well as lots of standardized testing information. But expected family contribution is like a secret proprietary formula, but you fill out your FAFSA and that comes back so the college knows what your family can expect to pay. They subtract that from the cost of attendance and they get your financial need. And then the college then takes that number and makes a financial aid package. So no matter where you apply, your EFC is always the same. So whether a college is $72,000 or $10,000, what you're expected to pay is the same. And then the college tries, if they really want you there, to come up with as much money as they can to make up that difference. So that's why that is so important. I think knowing that number and knowing how that works, because we're going to talk a little about sticker price, but that's where EFC comes in, and you see the big numbers, but then you do the EFC and you're like, oh, this private school actually costs less than this less expensive school. Like what? Because you get a much better financial aid package that helps you pay for it.
And Tim, you may know, but with 2 students in college, that number is divided in half. So it's divided equally amongst both boys. You still have 1 expected family contribution, a contribution from you and your family, but it will be divided by 2, 1 for one student, 1 for the other, in the 3 years that they'll be in school together.
Okay.
That's how my parents afforded school, because we were all 3 in college at the same time. So that expected family contribution got divided by 3. And all of a sudden, I was able to attend the school that I wanted to.
Yeah.
And as far as the conversations about this, honesty is the best policy. As a counselor, the hardest part of the whole entire counseling process is if a student gets into the school of their dreams and they then find out lastly that they can't afford it. That's devastating, because they did everything on their part to get in, they feel, and they're blindsided by what a family's budget is. It's really humbling to have these conversations with a student. You don't want to share your business with them, but to give them an idea of budget and these conversations, hey, cost is important and it's something that is going to factor in. Just keeping that conversation going throughout the whole time that they're in high school will give them motivation to not only earn the best grades, but to be diligent in looking at these deeper costs and how that impacts the family and what there will be there for you. Uncomfortable, yes. The key to exiting the college search process as a family, this is the key to that.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is, as you're launching a successful college search, hand in hand with that can go launching a successful scholarship search process.
Sure.
And starting to apply for scholarships.
Yeah. Okay. So schools that meet full need. Jen works for a school that does meet full need of a student. And can you just explain the difference between that and a school that does not?
Yeah, so that EFC comes back, and then you get the financial aid package, what they have to make to cover the cost of attendance. If a school meets full need, that what they say is whatever that bottom number is, once you subtract your EFC, we will give you a financial aid package to cover all of that. Now, it could be scholarships and grants, it could be loans, or it could be more likely to be a combination of those, but they will meet the full need. Schools that don't guarantee to meet the full need may come up a little short with their financial aid package. So they may say, you know, we should give you $60,000, but your financial aid package is only $50,000. And you then, as a family, need to figure out a way to come up with that other $10,000. So meeting full need is really awesome. And when colleges say that, like, that is so important when you're starting the search to look at that.
But it may include loans, and most likely will include loans.
Yeah. And then, and the schools are need blind. That means that the admissions team will review your application and make a decision regardless of your ability to pay. Schools that are not need blind, that are need aware, may look at your ability to pay and then make decisions kind of based on what their financial aid budget is. Like, they only have a certain amount of money to spend toward financial aid. So they'll be like, we don't want to accept this student because we know we're going to meet their full need, but we can't meet their full need, so we won't accept them. So.
And how does that go back to the early decision, early action conversation that we had before?
Well, I think what it means is a lot of the students who are accepted early decision will probably have very high numbers for their EFC. So the family contribution will be expected to be high, because that way they save their budget money for the regular decision applicants, who they know are more likely, just from my general experience, to be less affluent, to be more often to be first generation college students. And so they may hold that pot of money. And so in some ways they may have a bit of a disadvantage if they apply early decision. Not always, and not all schools, but it's a potential. So you can see here, there's like so many different types of financial aid. We are planning on hosting, I think late August. If you go to the website and our webinars page, we have a list of upcoming webinars. We're going to do one just on financial aid and scholarships because it's such a big topic. And again, there's different kinds of loans, there's different kinds of merit aid, and what schools call merit aid. So there's just a lot going on with financial aid. But if you know the cost of attendance, and you can even guesstimate the EFC with a calculator on the FAFSA website. And again, if you go to our resource page that I put the link in the chat, you can go to the FAFSA page and use their calculator. We're giving you all these calculators today. You can go to the calculator and you can kind of take a look and see, like, what might that be?
And the merit-based awards, like your boys may be going after athletic awards or music awards. They want to develop a portfolio, everything that they can do to substantiate their talents and abilities that would differentiate themselves in the admissions process, but also in the financial aid process. You're looking at both. You're trying to get them to stand out on the financial aid side as well as the admission side. So keep that in mind. And if a package comes back and it's not one that you can afford, or you feel as though their talent was under evaluated, call. I used to work as a financial aid counselor for 10 years at Hofstra University. And if a parent called me, I would take a second look. And many times I would explain why the package was what it was. But then other times I'd say, okay, we have this scholarship. I didn't realize, you know, that your child might be eligible for that. And then we would reevaluate that package.
Nice.
So this basically summarizes what we hope you are walking away with from this conversation that we've had and from this webinar that we've done, that you have a deeper understanding of what the numbers mean and how admissions are sharing those numbers and where to find them, that you know some follow-up questions to ask, that you are ready to dive into, you know, with your students, like all of these things, and talk with them about what it is that they're looking for. and have those meaningful family conversations so that you're all on the same page at the start, which will save, stress, heartache, heartbreak later on in the process. Tomorrow, I'm going to be emailing you 2 handouts that I think are like fantastic. I wish I had them. One is a spreadsheet that you'll be able to fill out that has a lot of these things we talked about. So your student can just sort of check it off or can write notes in it. And the other is a list of questions, multiple questions, some just for the student to think about and some for you to sit down and talk about as a family, to have a discussion about, well, what are you thinking about, even if it's early. So we hope you sign up for our newsletter, and you can do that at keys2college.org. And then if you have any questions after this, because sometimes if you're like me, sometimes you leave a webinar and you're like, oh, I meant to ask that question. And so you're always welcome to email us at K2C, which is basically an acronym for Keys to College, K2C at keys2college.org. And we're happy to answer your questions.